Good afternoon now. Good afternoon, Tofumi, and good afternoon, everyone on the call. Thank you, Tofumi, for the amazing and very robust introduction. I feel some type of way when my profile is being read and all of that. But thank you very much for that. And more importantly, thank you everyone that has joined the call this afternoon. I understand that today is a Tuesday. It's probably in the middle of a lot of things that you have to juggle at work. But I thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for taking the opportunity to learn, and we hope that we would make it worth your while we go on it. I promise, as Tofiman had also mentioned, we'll ensure to stick to time. I'll probably do this in some 30, 35 minutes to try and just talk through a couple of slides that I've prepared for a session like this. The topic of our webinar today being KPIs that measures important things. And I've just decided to paraphrase it in that manner. I think that the way organizations have come to define performance management, the way organizations particularly in recent years with more literatures, improvement in the concept of performance management, evolution of that concept. I think that what has been clear and what has become very clear to everyone is that we would need to measure things. We would need to build a performance management system. I think that bit is not lost on anyone, no matter the size of the organization, big, small. The typical example of what people would call a one-man business and all of that, where one person is both the CEO, the marketer, the business development person, and does all of these things. Even in those kinds of environment, it has become very pertinent and very important to the work that we do that you must be able to measure. And even if you think about the concept of measurement in itself, what is clear is that even if we take it away from the corporate environment and we take it into generally life, every now and then we measure everything that we do. You measure the salt you put in your food. You measure the seasoning that goes into your food. You measure the quantity of food that you cook. You measure your weight. You measure your height. You measure the kilometers that you drive on. Your car dashboard gives you data about almost everything around the car these days. So the importance of measuring or taking decision based on data is definitely not lost on anyone. If you've joined this session today, I think that I can assume that you understand that it is important to measure. However, what we've in our experience in recent years as an organization, consulting for different organizations, building performance systems across several organizations, one of the things that we have discovered is that people don't measure the important things. There's a tendency for people to have what they call key performance indicators, KPIs, on an Excel sheet and say the header of that column is key performance indicator, and then they put things under it. In our own parlance, we say that because you say that you call it KPI does not mean that the KPI is KPI. And that's the way that we talk about it, because we believe that there are some technicalities, there are some steps, there are some proper methodology to actually follow to develop a proper KPI framework for organization. If you start to think about that idea, what you would really discover is that people call KPIs and probably just, for the want of better expression, they just wanted to put something there to be able to, because they know that you need to measure. So they coin things, call it key performance indicators to measure, but at the end of the day, when we look at it, it does not follow the syntax, the model, and the way that a proper KPI should be designed. And then even when people have the right kind of KPIs in terms of the format for writing it, the challenge again that then organizations encounter is, are these KPIs that we have selected measuring the most important things within the organization? Now, please note that we have called it key performance indicator, and I'm going to start to share my slides now. Please note that we have called it key performance indicators. Now, we have called it key performance indicators because we didn't call it performance indicators. We have called it key performance indicators because it is supposed to measure the most important things. And that's why I've called my session this afternoon, Measuring What Matters. We measure, you will measure, you measure every now and then. The question is, are you measuring what matters? Because it is not designed the concept of a KPI framework or building a performance management system is not to design a system that measures everything that moves in an organization. It is a system that is designed to measure the things that are critical to success in that organization, on that role, within that department, within that function. We want to be able to measure the things that are critical to success. And I mean, I give a very obvious example. When you if you sort of are trying to lose weight and you are trying to reduce your calorie intake in a way you are trying to go to the gym, the most important thing to measure in that regard would be the number of kilograms that you have lost. Why will think that you should balance that with a KPI that measures the effort that will deliver that result? The effort that you would measure in that regard have to be the KPI, have to be effort that we can draw a straight line between that effort and that result. And we are saying that even the effort that you put into it must also be measurable. I'm currently reading a book, Daniel Kahneman. I'm sure that a couple of people on the call today might have read that before. Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. And one of the most important things that was said in that book is that thinking itself requires attention, but attention is measurable. And I mean, that's a case where people start to talk about how do you, because even the attention itself is measurable. You cannot, if you put 100% attention on something, there is no 10% attention to put on another thing. So when we talk about the concept of multitasking, I mean, the argument is that if you fully focus on something, you are able to achieve better results than dividing that attention into other things. So the entire idea about what to measure is that we need to be able to create and isolate specific effort that can deliver specific results. And that is the line and that's the spectrum that we're measuring on. So what we want to do today is to teach us and get us to a place. And I hope that at the end of the session, everybody lands at a place where you understand that and you are able to rethink the KPIs that you currently use. You look at them, you review them, and you're able to make a decision in terms of rethinking them to actually measure the most important things within the organization. That someone has 20 or 25 KPIs does not mean that the KPIs does not prove the efficacy of those KPIs. It does not prove that those KPIs will actually measure the most important things that connects to the overall thing that the organization is trying to achieve. So this is the way that we expect that people will think about it. That you are able to leave this session, go back and look at those KPIs and see if they really genuinely measures the things that you want them to measure, and how then do you begin to rethink them and how do you adjust. So I'm just going to walk us through two concepts today. I talked briefly about the concept of the balance scorecard, which is an important strategy and performance management tool. And then I talk also extensively on developing a KPI framework and how this helps to be able to achieve those things. So again, Nero, as Tofumi had introduced, the management consulting firm that has done serious work for corporate organizations in building performance management systems, developing corporate strategy, process improvement systems, and all of that, training programs on performance management and strategy. And I mean, just really a few of them, and some of those you can find on our website if you check them out. I usually like to start my sessions on performance management with this quote that says, "What cannot be measured cannot be managed. What cannot be managed cannot be improved." And I say this because we have agreed that we need to measure. But the problem at the end of the day is that when people talk about the concept of performance management, there's almost an immediate focus on the management leg of it. And people almost forget that if you don't measure it, that it's difficult to manage, because at the end of the day, management is decision making. Looking at something, I think it was Adam Smith that said that the resources are always scarce, and so because resources are always scarce, that's the reason that you take management decision as to where to allocate those resources. Now that is decision making, but to be sure that you are taking the best decision, you must be able to measure and have the right kinds of data that would actually help you to make the best decisions. If you take decisions without data, there's a chance, or a very huge chance, that decision is going to go left. And if I can use that. So we think that if you don't measure right, and I say it as someone with years of experience building performance management system, to say that where a lot of organizations get it wrong is in the measurement leg, not in the management. And for some of us that are HR professionals in the room, when we're talking about employee performance management, you would agree with me that management is very easy. Put this person on performance improvement plan, promote this person, let them remain in the position that they are, pay this person bonus. If those are decision-making things that you can quickly make. But if you are making those decisions on wrong data, you can see how dangerous or how disastrous that can actually lead, or that can actually turn for the organization at the end of the day. So what we're saying in this session is that you must do the heavy lifting in the measurement leg, the setting of the goals, the setting of the objectives, the setting of the selection of the KPIs, the kinds of targets that you send, the frequency of being able to report on those things. That is when you do all the heavy lifting. If you do the heavy lifting in measurement, I think, and my personal opinion is that 70% of performance problems is solved if you get the heavy lifting done at the point of measurement. The other things that follow are probably a lot easier. And we say that what cannot be managed cannot be improved. We say this because at the end of the day, the reason you build a performance management system in the first place is for improvement. You are not building a performance management system for the purpose of punitive measures, for the purpose of promotion, for the purpose of performance improvement plan. No. Those, and I believe, and that's the way I define them, those are byproduct of the process. The reason you do it is to understand where you are as an organization and be able to make projection as to where you need to go to. So you do it for improvement. And when you sort of message it like this within the organization, what it does is that people are always honest with performance data. When you sort of project and make a proper distinction to say the reason we're doing any of this is to help you understand that we need to improve. We need to look at your performance. And that's why you find organizations finish appraisal and they cannot do year-on-year comparison, because the only reason they've done the appraisal is to be able to look at who should be paid bonus, who should actually be promoted, or who should be punished, in quotes. That's the only reason. So it's difficult for them to go back and say, you did 85 last year, why are you doing 73? Because there's no year-on-year comparison. They just look at, take a microscopic view on a particular year and make a decision on them. And I think that these are some of the things that we need to adjust if we are going to build a performance management system. So just to recap what we have said, you must measure before you manage. The reason you also manage is because you want to improve. I hope that we've been able to establish that as we make improvement. Now, because I've stressed the point of measurement and management, one thing I wanted to do is that I want to try this afternoon to create a distinction for you between performance measurement and performance management. Because if you don't understand it, and in set theory in secondary school those days, one of the things that they taught us, if my memory serves me right, is the concept of the Venn diagram, where they say something is a subset of something. So at the end of the day, what we're saying is that performance measurement is a subset of performance management. It's a sub-process of performance management that is focused on planning, on tracking and evaluation. And that's really the work that you are trying to do. It is in performance measurement that you are sort of looking at it and say, oh, what should this person be doing? What is the right measurement of what they are doing? Because at the end of the day, what is performance? What are you trying to do when you are setting KPI? When I speak in some other rooms, maybe not in rooms like this, and I try to give a layman definition of some of these things, I say that your KPI is how we know that you are doing what we asked you to do. So the first question is that when people don't have what is to be done, which takes us back to conversations like job descriptions for HR professionals, when people are not very clear as to this is what I should be doing, this is what I should focus on, it becomes very difficult to be able to track and evaluate what they should be doing. So if you look at your CAD dashboard, what your CAD dashboard does for you is actually releasing data about the performance of your car. And that's what performance measurement is about. So it gives you data about fuel gauge, it gives you data about thermometer, the temperature of the vehicle, it gives you data about your ref, which is the odometer, it gives you data about your speedometer, which is the kilometers that you have covered, or the speed at which you are moving. So at the end of the day, this process is very important. Now, what are the things that you do in this process? The first thing is the selection of KPIs. And I mean, that goes hand in hand with setting the objective, building job descriptions, and then creating the KPIs that helps us to do it. Now, remember that I said that KPI is how we will know that you have done. That's why it's an indicator. How do we know that you have done what we have asked you to do? So, selection of KPIs. There was a research conducted, I believe, in 2016 by the KPI Institute, where it was said that of the people that responded to that survey, 32% actually said the biggest problem they have with performance management is the selection of KPIs. And I think that it's a proper sample, or the right kind of sample size for a lot of the things that I have personally experienced on the field building performance management system. You see that the challenge is in actually being able to look at what people do and be able to say this is how to measure it. And I mean, I think that we've done serious work in that regard as an organization, that I believe that it can really be simplified. It can really be simplified to make it very straightforward to be able to measure what people do. After you have selected the KPI, and I'm just going to sort of zero in a little bit of that at some point. After you have selected the KPI, the next layer is to start to gather data. And, we say this, our senior manager will always say, data is life, and not necessarily go Ethel. But the idea at the end of the day is that you cannot have the right kind of performance measurement system if you are not committed to the tracking of data. If you are going to build it, you must also build data collection competencies within the organization. The ability for people to know what sort of data report for what sort of KPIs at the end of the day. And I say this because, data has almost become like suggestions when people think about performance management. If you ask someone questions, even if you ask how many people are in the room, you find out that people say, I think, or we are about 20. People don't even take the time to say they want to go and measure or count. I mean, as simple as what's the population of Nigeria, I'm sure that we would have probably about 40 different answers if you ask in this room. That what is the population of the country? Probably see 200 million plus, 220 million plus, around 200, over 220. It's almost like people think of these things as some form of suggestion. And I mean, of course, we can draw a conclusion as to why that is in terms of our own, the country's population itself. But I think that the import of that is that we must be committed within an organization to the process of data gathering to be able to measure the KPIs. In fact, the way that I think about it is that performance management is boots on the ground. There's no system. I mean, you can buy software solutions, you can buy things and all of that. There's no system that sort of looks at somebody and says that I have collected the data for this person's job and I will just report the performance. It has to still be boots on the ground. Someone going, collecting the data, putting it into a system that can probably put it into a better visualization for you at the end of the day. So you must gather the data. Every KPI is useless if there's no data to actually track it. Because if I can say this, and I think that's probably an important point an important point that I should say this, any KPI that you will end up using on a scale of 1 to 5, rate this KPI, that's not a KPI. All KPIs are quantitative. There's no such thing as qualitative KPI. And it's important. And that's why I said, I believe that after this session, the call to action, if I can say that, will be for people to go back and look at their KPIs and start to think, are we able to use data to measure them? And I give an example. I mean, if I have a subordinate here and one of our KPI is percentage of customer satisfaction, if you bring it to me and say rate the person on customer satisfaction, you are doing a disservice to the person. You are also doing a disservice to the business itself. Because if you bring the person to me and you say I should rate, I probably give a 3 out of a 5 or a 4 if I'm very nice a boss out of a 5. Say, and I can give a reason for that, because I can say, oh, none of your customers came to report you to me, your boss, in the course of the year. So it means that you've done well. So I give you a 4/5. But if you are being honest with yourself, you have not asked the customer, If you want to know if customers are satisfied, why don't you just ask the customers and let the customers actually rate the person? And you know, when we talk about the concept of the balance scorecard, even and I'll get there, there's a section of the balance scorecard that is called the cost. There's a perspective that is called the customer perspective. The way we like to define it, we say, how do your customers see you as an organization? It is not how do you see your customers. I think that the way a lot of people measure employees or measure teams on customer satisfaction performance is usually on how do they see their customers, and the feeling is always nobody complained. But we're saying that at the end of the day, the way that you must think about it is that what is the data saying? If the target is 80%, that someone should achieve 80% customer satisfaction, if you deploy a customer satisfaction survey to 10 customers, what you are saying is that at least 8 out of the 10 must say that they are satisfied with the services. It is not your boss giving you 4. It is not your boss giving you 3. It is the KPI itself being measured with actual data. So there's no KPI, there's no such thing as qualitative KPI. And we can have conversations about behavioral objectives, which are probably best measured with a 360-degree appraisal model. We can talk about that at some point. But I think that for the functional part of performance, please, and it's important that you take this back. If this is one thing that you take out of this, please don't forget that your functional KPIs have to be fully empirical. And it's something that you have to be able to take out of this. And if it is fully empirical, it is only data that you can use to evaluate it. You will not, if you still end up on a scale of 1 to 5, rate this KPI, that's not a KPI. And we should just have that agreement at base level. Then the next thing is start to document data documentation. Then you analyze the data. And that's how you actually do some of the things that I talked about, which is maybe year-on-year comparison, the last 3 years, be able to look at what have this person done, this particular customer satisfaction KPI, 70% result last year, 78 this year, is dropped to 73, what has happened? Those are the things that you do. But if you don't think about performance as some sort of system that helps to improve, it becomes very difficult to be able to build something like that. And the next and final thing that you do in terms of performance measurement is the reporting. Then you report on it, you present a performance report. And if you work in HR, this is where the work of performance management terminates. If you work in strategy, this is where the work of performance measurement terminates. Then we morph into what we call performance management. So you measure, and then you lead into management. Then what is performance management? It's a strategic and integrated capability that drives sustained success by improving systems and people. And I think that this is very, very important. And each of the words in these definitions were carefully selected because we want to be able to let you know that the sustainable success that you are looking for within that organization is actually in being able to build the right performance management system. That if you get performance management right, what it does, it helps you to understand how and why you have achieved a success. What I know is that people can lock into success. And I mean, I know that people sometimes get a bit emotional when you say that you can achieve success by chance. But if you think about it, it is possible. And it's happened. There's several success stories all over the world that if I sort of ask around the room this afternoon as to how did this person achieve this success, I'm sure that we will all have varying answers. And we'll probably land at the point where most people will say, oh, it was God that helped the person. And some people call it luck, some people call it all other sort of names. But the point really is that you can achieve success by chance. But what performance management does for you is that it helps you build a scenario around that thing. It helps you understand why you achieved that success and what did you do that achieved that success. Is it repeatable? And that's the way KPIs work. For instance, in KPI setting, we usually have what we call the frequency of reporting. That frequency of reporting that we usually include in the KPI will help us actually tell if it is a KPI that is repeatable. There are some KPIs that are one-time KPIs that we measure them. For instance, if I ask you to develop a performance management framework from scratch for an organization, the moment you finish the framework, you have finished that KPI. We can talk about implementation as a separate KPI, but the development phase is a one-time KPI. It's not repeatable. So what KPI does for you is that it helps you to understand what KPIs are repeatable, what should we adjust, what should we take away, because it just helps you to understand why. And that's why one of the things that we say when we talk about performance management is that your performance management system must be built in a way that it must actually help you to understand the reason behind performance. Now, when I say this, there's a tendency for people, especially HR managers or people who have managed teams successfully for years, to think that what we're saying is understand the reason behind bad performance. No, we're saying understand the reason behind any kind of performance. There is no performance that we must not understand the reason behind, because people only try to understand performance result when it is bad and say, oh, why have you performed like this? What has happened? When result is good, people just clap, celebrate, and run off. And we think that that is not the ideal way to be able to measure performance. And it's important that organizations start to think in the way that to do it. And talk about improving systems and people. And one of the things that we believe that organizations neglect, and when we talk to organizations, we're always emphasizing this. One of the things that we believe that organizations neglect is the concept of systems performance management, the process within an organization. There's usually too heavy focus on the measurement of people. And as good as that is, that you are measuring the people, you are identifying what is working, what is not working, we really genuinely think that the way that we must think about performance management is that it must be an integrated system. We think of it as something that sort of exceeds the concept of people appraisal. Because, and I think that is also an important point to actually also say this. There is, and when people talk about performance management, there's a tendency for a lot of people to reduce it to performance appraisals. So performance appraisals. And we're saying that performance appraisal is just one leg of performance management. There is, if you build a fully integrated performance management system in an organization, you are going to have the enterprise performance, which is the performance of the organization. You are going to have the departmental performance, which is the performance of each department as they support the enterprise. The process performance, which is the performance of the processes within the team. And finally, the performance of individuals, which is what we mostly call performance appraisal. So you can see there are 3 other layers before we even land at that point. And we really think that when people think about performance management, they should think about this in that holistic manner. It should be an holistic approach. It should be all of it in one. Say, let us bring all of this together and be able to actually think about what are the right things to measure. Because if you do one at the expense of the other, what will happen is that you will measure people, but we will not see a reflection of what people are doing in terms of what the organization is trying to achieve. And it becomes a problem. So you must be able to think about the performance of systems, the processes, the SOPs. The SOPs you have in your organization, do they have their own KPIs? SOPs should also have key performance indicators. And this is something that we've done for several organizations. When we looked at the processes, documented them, build proper flow charts for each of those processes, and identify the KPIs, especially KPIs in terms of turnaround time to get things done. Because a lot of times what we think is that what hampers people performance is usually the performance of the systems. That when sometimes people don't perform and we're looking at it, if you treat it in isolation, what would happen is that you might not be able to figure out the problems. But if you go back and look at the performance of the processes, it's easier for you to be able to identify it. And I mean, very simple example is, for instance, if I'm facilitating this session with a Pentium 2 computer, what you would most likely notice is that the picture is probably not going to be this crisp. You're probably going to have a situation where maybe light goes off and we start to boot again and the entire 1 hour of the session is done. So it's important that people think about it. So what are the things that you do in performance management? So I call it performance management in action. Number 1, you understand the reasons behind performance. And I said this before. Understand the reasons behind performance. You understand what is not working. What should we adjust? What should we improve on? This is very important. You reallocate your resources. You allocate your resources the right way, you are able to know what next to give. Because again, like I said, performance management is resource allocation. Or management itself. The reason you are doing management is because resources are always scarce. So you are trying to manage them. I always say that there's no need for a management meeting if resources were always limitless. That means you can just share things and it goes. But we're saying that that's not really the way that it works. There must be an intentional effort to allocate resources the right way. And then the next is to build project initiatives and start different projects because of performance results. You know what has gone right, what has gone wrong. And that's why we keep saying it's for improvement, because you then come up with ideas, with projects that changes things, that helps us to move into the next level or next layer as an organization, engage and motivate employees towards goal achievement. And one of the things that I notice is that when we talk about engagement, I was in a conversation recently in a session, and someone defined employee engagement. It said employee engagement is winning the head of people, capturing their hearts, and unlocking discretionary effort from them. And I thought that was very profound. You win their head, you capture their hearts, and you unlock discretionary effort from them. What is discretionary effort? It is that even when you are not looking, people know what is to be done and they do it the right way. And engaged, that is the peak of employee engagement. That even when the owners of the business, when the leaders are not there, people can take up responsibility and know what is to be done, when to do them, and doing it the right way. Now, I'm saying this because, for us as an organization, a lot of the questions that we got during COVID was about how do you measure people when they work remotely. I still had a session last year about hybrid work, performance measurement, and all of that. And I think that my feeling all the time, even when I speak at sessions like that, is that it should be practically the same thing, especially for the functional part of performance. For the behavioral, we can look at it. When you don't see people, how do you measure their behavior? But for the functional part of performance, it is if you have given them the KPI or you've not given them the KPI. If you give them the KPI, it shouldn't be an issue for us, whether you can see them or not. But what has happened is that a lot of organizations have reduced the measurement of performance to only measuring people by attendance. People only think that others are working when they can see them. And we think that we need to move beyond that in building a proper performance management. If you set your KPIs right, even when you are not looking, you will unlock discretionary effort from people. So KPI is one of the most important tools that helps to drive engagement in an organization. When I know what my performance is going to be judged with at the end of the year, if my boss is not there, I know that I have to do this. So if you set the KPIs tight enough, people will get the work done, even when they are not there. And at the end of the day, it helps to change how work is done. It sort of changes it. People start to think differently. People are starting to look at work, and people are saying, you know what, this is what to do. This is how my performance is to be measured. And, I say it all the time. I tell employees when I'm in a session, I say, it is in your own interest to know your KPI like the palm of your hands. That if you know every of your KPI like the palm of your hand, it solves a lot of problems for you. And you understand what is required for success. And then you sort of follow through, and then you are moving at the end of the day. So, like I said, two things that I wanted to focus on. The first is the understanding the reasons behind performance. And, understanding performance drivers, one of the things that I believe that managers and senior people within organizations must actually have is that they must be able to interpret performance results correctly. And it's important that that is not lost on anyone. And that's why I talked about data analysis competency, data collection, data gathering competencies, because if you don't get those right, what will happen is that you will definitely not be able to actually know what has gone right, what has gone wrong, and where you need to get to as an organization. So people must be able to interpret results correctly. They must be able to link processes to outcome. And please, you remember I said it. One very major part of performance that people neglect is process performance management. The processes that deliver the result. You must be able to link what is happening within to the results that is to be achieved on the outside at the end of the day. So to link processes to outcomes, and then you must be able to understand context. I like to say this very well. Please, KPI is not the criminal justice system. I think that a lot of organizations treat KPIs as though we are in court. The symbol of justice is a blindfolded woman, a sword on one hand and a weighing scale on the other one. What that means is that, context sometimes might be lost. But we're saying that in terms of KPIs, we need to be able to understand context. Managers must be able to, what has happened. And that's why when we build performance systems for organization, we would say, put a section for comments so that the employee can put their comment, the manager can put their comment. We can understand the context to that performance result. And the last on that is to establish a cause and effect relationship. And This is very important because at the end of the day, we must be able to tell the effort that delivers the result. And if we can't tell that effort, it becomes a problem. And I've sort of spoken extensively about employee engagement. And for the want of time, I'm just going to move very quickly on this. So performance management helps employees to understand organizational goals. I know how my work connects to the overall thing. There's a popular story of JF Kennedy, the former president of the US, where he went to NASA. And in NASA, he saw a janitor, a cleaner, walking around, and he asked the janitor, what exactly is your role in this place? The janitor said, my role is to get astronauts to space. Just think about that for a second. My role is to get astronauts to space. That is someone that understands how cleaning connects to the overall thing that the organization is trying to achieve. And that is what KPI does. If he has a KPI that says you must clean turnaround time within 3 minutes, just think about that. You have a 3 minutes turnaround time for every water spillage, clean it. And he does not do it in 3 minutes, which is his KPI. And the lead astronaut slips and breaks his leg. And that's the end of that particular project. That particular astronaut, at least for a while, is not going into space. So at the end of the day, we must give employees the right kind of KPI to engage them so that they understand how the work they do connects. Now, if we cannot find a direct or an indirect link between the work that people do to the overall thing that the organization is trying to achieve, it becomes really, really very difficult to be able to build that. They must see their role in achieving those goals. Managers must actively engage with their teams. And I want to be able to say this, as I've even sort of, as I've seem to be on Omron now. Managers must actively engage with their teams. And you see, this is important because at the end of the day, what you notice is that performance management, a lot of the way that people treat it, they treat it as half year and end of the year thing. The performance management is much more than that. You must, what you do half year and end of the year is a review. You monitor performance across the entire year. There's no stop. There must be an active engagement, active reasons to talk to people as a manager about their KPIs, about the things that you adjust. And then, of course, it helps to address concerns that are impacting performance. So, as I begin to round up, one of the things that I want us to be able to think about is that you cannot treat performance management in isolation of strategy. And this is an encouragement to HR professionals, strategy professionals in the room, leaders of business. The first thing in building a proper performance management system is to actually define your strategy. And I think that this is the easiest of the work. The hardest of the work is implementation. There's a data from the Harvard Business Review in the late 90s that said that 1 out of every 10 organizations will execute their strategy. It says that 90% of strategy will fail at the point of execution. I read a more recent data from Clearpoint strategy that says it is 66% will actually fail at the point of execution. And if you think about that, you understand how difficult this is. And the 2 Harvard professors, Kaplan and Norton, that developed the concept of the balanced scorecard, actually wrote a book that they call the top 10 pitfalls of strategy execution. One of the things that they mentioned, I can't go through all of it, is that people don't build a proper performance measurement and management system around their strategy. And we think that that's where a lot of organizations miss it out. You have very fine strategy developed. You get into execution, you are not measuring the right way, you are not taking management decision. It makes it very difficult to achieve any strategy at the end of the day. And that's really the way it works. And if you remember what I said, the concept really is to be able to cascade from what the organization is trying to achieve at the top down to the individuals. And if you don't build a system like that, what will happen is that, and it's an experience that we see all the time when we walk around with organization. When we finish appraisal, average employee performance 90%. Which is a reflection, 90%, which is a reflection of average performance at the individual level. At the enterprise level, you are then seeing 32%, for instance. That mismatch that exists between these 2 results is actually because the proper cascading has not been done. And it takes work. I always say it is not a quick fix, it's not a fad, it's something that people need to genuinely invest in, put in a lot of energy in being able to identify the big picture, cascade it into organizational goals, break to department, break to teams, and then to individuals within the organization to be able to land at a particular point. So I'm just going to talk briefly about it. So at the end of the day, one of the things I wanted to be able to talk about is why KPIs matter, and this is why I round up. KPIs helps to clarify individual responsibilities. And when I talk about clarity, and I always say it, when I speak on performance management and I say clarity, what clarity means in that instance is that it must give a clear numerical view of what is to be measured. If it is not clear, if it is qualitative, KPIs, it must give a detailed numerical view of what. And so when we talk about it, clarity in this instance is what exactly is very clear. So at the end of the day, we created a couple of, so I'm just really, like I said, just really to think about the way it works. One of the things that we always recommend is that when you are setting your KPIs, 3 questions that you must ask yourself: is it relevant? I call them the acid test or the litmus test that your KPI must pass through. That KPI that you are calling a KPI, is it relevant? Is it clearly defined? And when I say clearly defined, what does that mean? Is it measurable with data? That's clearly defined. If it is a scale of 1 to 5, that's not a KPI. And then the last is it balanced? What does is it balanced mean? Have we measured the effort that will deliver the right kinds of results that we want at the end of the day? If your answer to each of these questions is yes, that is the right KPI. But if any of the answer is no, please go and rethink that KPI. And this is a very good litmus. And I just came up with a couple of sample KPIs that some of us can start to look at. Percentage of employee turnover. These are important KPIs that measures what is important and what matters. Employment brand strength, which is about, as an employer, how likely are people, is your office a desirable place to work? Those are the kinds of KPI that HR people should track. Employee satisfaction, value of net cash flow. Those are important KPIs. And then, for example, budget variance at the end of the day. And this is an example of a performance scorecard that can help to track those things. So you put your objective, you put your KPI, you set the targets there, you have a result as against that target, and then you talk about percentage of target completion, and then you are able to achieve that at the end of the day. And if you look at the way the system is built, we have adopted a traffic light symbol, to actually give us a view. If you look at this, almost immediately you can spot where the problems are. If you look at the red, you already know that the red, and we have defined it here. If you look here, anything between 0 to 50 is this. And that's really the way that we build a system at the end of the day. So on the final note, if you remember this machine that we use to actually, I know that a lot of the bougie people will call it mincemeat, but for some of us on the streets, we'll probably call it, they use for egusi now, or ogbono. If you pour your corporate strategy into it, a properly defined corporate strategy, the machine itself is an integrated performance management system, and you start to wind it very well, and you build dedicated organizational capacity, which is training people on performance management, ensuring that the knowledge is not left with only C-suite executive or only senior managers, democratizing the concept of performance management within the organization. That's when you achieve the right kind of outcome that you want. What I like to say as I round up is, what you cannot measure does not exist. I think that is very important. Please never forget that. If you can't measure it, it does not exist. If you want to actually be able to properly measure performance, it must be data driven at the end of the day. So on that note, I want to say thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Wow. That was indeed an insightful session. I have my jotter filled up with a lot of new ideas I need to implement. Thank you so much, Mr. Tomiwa. Now we are moving to the Q&A segment. You all can drop your chats. You can drop your questions in the chat, and you can raise your hands if you have questions. I can see there are hands up. Dara, you raised your hand. Can you unmute to ask your question? Okay, so she said it's a mistake. So I have a question here in the chat from Abib Adeyemo. And the question says, he works with a yogurt company, let's say a mid-size FMCG company in Ibadan and Lagos, and they are scaling from a regional distribution to national coverage. In the process, they've introduced multiple KPIs across sales, operation, and supply chain, but teams are now hitting targets without necessarily driving real growth. E.g., sales team meeting volume targets through heavy discounting, operations optimizing output, but increasing wastage. In a scenario like this, how can you redesign or prioritize KPIs to ensure they truly drive scalable, sustainable business outcomes rather than just activity or short-term wins? And as a follow-up, what's your framework for identifying when a KPI has become busy work instead of real performance driver, especially during a scalable phase?
Oh, that's a 6 pointer. Thank you very much for that question, and thank you, Abib. I hope I got the name right. So, I think that what we've tried to do in the last 30, 35, 40 minutes or thereabout is really to try and crunch a 5-day training into 40 minutes. And so that means that a lot of many concepts were skipped to be able to sort of arrive at a good point to leave it today. Now, I mean, the question is in many parts. So I start with the conversation around people easily meeting targets at the end of the day. And when you're building a performance management framework, we usually talk about 3 things that are essential. You must be able to create your strategic objectives or the objectives for that job. You develop the KPI, and then you end up with the target. So you have the objective, you have the KPI, you have the target. In target setting, we have different sources of setting targets. And I think that while I probably cannot go into a lot of the literature on that, one of the most important part of setting target that I always talk about, especially when you don't have historical data to rely on, is to actually be ambitious, but also stay within safe limits. And that looks contradictory because essentially what I'm asking is, how do you find the midpoint between ambition and staying within safe limits? I expect, and I think that it is something that organizations that are probably scaling, as the yogurt company was described, it is expected that as you are trying to scale, there will definitely be a need to create ambitious targets. And that's why we must go back to look at the process of setting those KPI. Did we follow the principles that guides target setting? Were the targets too low for the job that is happening? And I say this because a lot of also what I believe, and when people talk about it, I know that a lot of it evokes a lot of emotions when people talk about changing the goalpost on target setting, maybe in the middle of the year, because maybe the targets were easily achieved and all of that. And I say this, there's really not, in actual terms, there's nothing wrong with changing targets. The only thing is that nobody should unilaterally go and look at it and just adjust it. It should be a conversation as to the prevailing realities. If I use an example, if you work in oil and gas, for instance, 2023, the price of the product went from, I believe, something less than 200 naira per liter into over 1,000 naira per liter. Now, if you have a target at the beginning in terms of money that you're supposed to sell for specific volume targets, if you sold 2 million targets at 200 naira, the amount is way less than if you sold the same 2 million for 1,200. So if you maintain the target and say don't change the target in the middle of the year, people would overachieve. And it looks like they've overachieved, but in essence, in terms of the effort that has delivered that result, we really cannot draw a line and say we've put in more effort to achieve probably over 500, 600% increase in something. So at the end of the day, it is about, let us go back to check the target. The target that was set, have we properly followed the right guides and principles that set target? Those principles must actually be properly followed. The checking of historical data, the internal benchmarking, the external benchmarking process, all of those processes must be followed to arrive at the target. And if people are still achieving the target, maybe they are just high flyers. But the first thing to check is really, do we have the right kinds of KPIs and do we have the right kinds of targets to be able to measure? And then the final part of that question talks about what is the framework for identifying KPIs that measures busy work. And I think that um, a lot of times, and when we build performance management system, when we look at the work that people do, even if you share someone's job description with me, for instance, the first thing I'm trying to weed out are the activities from that thing. We can tell from the activities. If you look at the JD, you can tell the things that are not critical to success on the role. You can tell the things that if I have measured A, that means that B, C, and D must have been achieved for A to be achieved. So you don't measure A, B, C, D. You measure A and you move to E. So the concept really is just to say, what kinds of things do we have in that system that does not directly link to overall success of the business? If we can't find that link that are not critical to success on the role, I always say your job description is the entire content of the role. Your KPI is the things that are critical to success. So there are two different things. And so you have activities in your job descriptions. You must be able to properly weed them out. And I think that a lot of those things comes with experience building these kinds of system and being able to adjust this. And I hope that I've been able to do a bit of justice to that. Again, we can take up the conversation outside of the call, but I think essentially that is what it is. So from the please.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Habib, I hope your question is answered. Due to time, I think we'll just take Madam Damilola because it's worn already. So as someone who work in a branding and social media strategy, I did love to know what KPIs you think um we should prioritize to measure real impact for clients beyond vanity metrics like likes and impressions.
All right, and this is an important question, and thank you, Madam Oluwadamilola. Thank you very much. I think that at the end of the day, the way that that we should, and thank you for using the word like vanity metric. I think that is also probably one of the things that people talk about a lot these days. Now, measuring a social media team is probably some of the difficult things, especially measuring it in the right way. I mean, when we're talking about departments like legal, departments like social media, social media teams like this, especially because you don't want to reduce every of the work that is being done to impressions and likes and follow. But if you look at building things like that, I believe that when you are building a social media platform, the question all the time would be, what are you trying to achieve? One important thing that I think that you are trying to achieve is brand image index. Your brand image index at the end of the day is probably the ultimate, which is at the end of the day, and usually we advise that people do it on a scale of 1 to 10. What is the brand image index? Because the work that you are doing on social media is to get people to know that these organizations exist. You know, when they say that some big brands have become household name, what it really means at the end of the day is that their brand image index has shot up the roof. I was saying that that's one impact KPI that we should always be thinking about. What is the brand image index at the end of the day? We should be looking at also share of voice. And I like that KPI, something that I've sort of come to like very recently, share of voice. Because again, an organization that, say maybe a commercial bank should be tracking the percentage share of voice in media, maybe, and you can segment it, print media separately, digital media separately, which is out of the total kinds of media mentions that commercial banks are getting, what percentage comes to our bank? And that's an important one because it's a testament to the work that you are doing as a social media team. And I think that at the end of the day, we need to start to look at things like selling. How do you help the business to actually sell on the outside? Because your work cannot only stop at publicizing. Your work also have to be that, can we start to convert some of those? Can we generate leads through social media? And we start to think about the process of converting those leads. And those are probably important things that you can look at to be able to measure those things. So thank you very much for your question. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope all your questions are answered. So as we wrap up, I would like to thank our dearest facilitator, Mr. Tomiwa Anjorin, and all our participants for joining today. And I hope you found this session so insightful and valuable. At Neuro, we believe in taking action. And if you'd like to have more knowledge and would want to learn more about KPIs that drive results and not busy work, You can register for upcoming training in the next month, April. And also our training calendar is going to be up on your screen right now. So you can get more information. You can email me on learning@neuro.com, or you can call the number on your screen for joining the next training or subsequent ones. Once again, I thank you all for being part of today's session, and we look forward to seeing you in our future events. Have a great day, everybody.